Talking about the quality of video games is something that does not compare very well when discussing the merits of any other art form. The reason why I think this is because no other art form relies as heavily on technology as video games do. Technology is still utilized in other art forms too, obviously. However, no other field is as reliant on tech advancements as gaming. Let's take the film industry for example, as I believe that is the second most tech essential art industry, so we'll use that as a comparison. James Cameron's Avatar series has two sets of films that came out in 2009 and 2022, 13 years apart from one another. While yes, the leap in visuals are definitely noticeable if you are specifically looking for them, it does not even come close to what the gaming industry has seen given the same amount of time. Let's take a look at two premier Sony titles from the same years, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves from 2009 and Horizon Forbidden West from 2022. There is just no debate on if these games are even graphically close. Now, Uncharted 2 still looks like a visually appealing game to this day, but compared to 99% of other modern games, it gets blown right out of the water. In fact, I believe that this goes beyond presentation, and that modern games across the board are generally superior to older ones, at least in terms of gameplay, graphics, and performance. Find me a game before 2015 that looks better than Horizon Forbidden West. You can't. Find me a game that came out pre-Destiny 2 that has more fun shooting mechanics. It's not possible. Find me a game that came out prior to Knack 2 that was a better showcase of a console's power. You could probably find several, but my point still stands. Now don't get me wrong, the modern gaming industry fucking sucks. I mean, we can't go 2 weeks without a sexual harassment scandal or some monetization bullshit, but the majority of the time, the games that are released today aren't the problem, as they are generally better than what we had decades ago. When people list games that are among their favorites or they believe are the best and those games are a bit older, they are more than likely attributing those placements to the nostalgia they had for those titles or the impact it made on them and the gaming industry. And you know what? Fair enough. That is a perfectly legitimate reason in order to rate a piece of art as high as you want. I'm not here to shit on other people's taste, unless you like Heavy Rain, as I have a few nostalgia related takes that may not be better from a technical standpoint either, but I still stand by them. I think Silent Hill 2 is a better horror game than Resident Evil 7. I also believe that Majora's Mask is a superior game to Breath of the Wild. I'm even of the mind that Super Mario Galaxy outdoes everything in Super Mario Odyssey. However, the newer games I just listed are superior from a technical front. They can actually be easily obtained thanks to being readily available on a number of modern platforms. They're graphically far superior. They generally run better than the old games did on their native hardware, and they're also far larger in scale and scope. So why am I bringing this up? Why did I just ramble on about why I believe old games' biggest selling point are nostalgia and that new games are superior? I think it's important for me to paint this picture of my thought process of looking at older titles, and especially ones I have zero nostalgia for. Growing up, I had a decent number of consoles. Everything from the SNES, N64, GameCube, PlayStation 1 and 2. Hell, I even had a Dreamcast. Yep, just 7-year-old ItsGheb sitting in his room playing Seaman on his Dreamcast.
On the internet, nobody has to know I'm a seaman.
Yes, I'm still traumatized. Thank you for asking. One thing that passed me by in my youth was the PC gaming scene. My family had a desktop computer, but really my only interest in PC gaming at the time was browser-based flash games on sites like Newgrounds or the biggest MMO RPG of the early to mid 2000s that everyone adored, RuneScape. The gaming scene in the late 90s and early 2000s had actually a pretty large divide between consoles and PCs. Nowadays, it's almost strange to see a title not come to all of the major platforms, but back then you never saw any PC games get released to consoles. Doom, Duke Nukem, Quake, StarCraft, Diablo, Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Half-Life, Warcraft, Baldur's Gate, Thief, Ultima, System Shock, Civilization, The Sims, Age of Empires. The list goes on and on and on. These games either saw vastly inferior ports or had no console support at all. This was an entire generation of games that at the time I had not even been aware of, let alone had a desire to play. Because of that, the old PC gaming landscape has always fascinated me. So many amazing titles that people still talk about to this day. It's because of this that I wanted to discuss what I believe may be one of the most important games from that scene, and that game is Deus Ex. Deus Ex is a series that has come and gone again, and has an incredibly dedicated fan base around it. I often hear the game thrown around in many top games of all time lists, and I know plenty of people who have been personally touched by this game. Now with all that in mind, I want to be very upfront with my thoughts on this game. Going back to older video games that I have never played before can often be a daunting task. I did not feel that way with this game. Deus Ex is one of the best games I have ever played. I say that with no hesitation, no nostalgia, and no prior experience. This is simply just a remarkable, timeless video game that I believe has incredibly intelligent design and storytelling. It has a few blemishes due to its age, no doubt. However, those became afterthoughts to me during my playthrough. So how did Deus Ex become such a remarkable title? What was the impact that it had on gaming culture? And what can games learn from it today? I hope to answer all of those questions and more in this video. But first, I of course have to let you guys know that I'm regularly streaming on Twitch, and I actually stream the majority of Deus Ex on there. So if you're interested in watching me play Trash Tetris, I have left a little link for you in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a like and consider subscribing. Finally, at the end of the video, I have a special announcement for plans for future content on this channel, so you'll not want to miss that. So without further ado, let's jump straight into Deus Ex. It is impossible to talk about Deus Ex without first talking about the man behind the project, Warren Spector. During his time in college, Spector began developing his love for board games such as Ogre and GEV. This was until Spector found himself in the company of a few science fiction writers who were into the tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is a game almost entirely about player choice, as there was no set-in-stone solution to any problem that a player in the game may come across. The player's options are only limited to their imagination, and this idea grabbed Spector right away. Warren Spector got a job at Steve Jackson Games in the early 80s. Definitely not the most original name for a game development studio, but I wonder if that logo is going to be something that Spector remembers for future projects. During his time working with the studio, he continued to develop the TTRPGs Toon, GURPS, and a supplement for the game Paranoia entitled Send in the Clones. He eventually landed a position at TSR, the same company that originally published Dungeons & Dragons. During his time there, he worked on many notable projects, including Top Secret, the Marvel Superhero RPG, the 2nd edition rule set for Dungeons & Dragons, and the Spelljammer D&D setting, one of Dungeons & Dragons' take on a sci-fi oriented world. In 1989, Warren Spector made the transition from the tabletop industry into the world of video games. He joined with Origin Systems, who at the time were best known for their Ultima series. Spector began getting his feet wet in a co-production role with the titles Ultima 6 and Wing Commander, before being the sole producer of the game Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss. This game is often noted as the first example of a genre called immersive sims. This is a genre that is built upon 3 basic principles: player agency, emergent gameplay, and the ability to pick up random shit and throw it around. This game also pioneered many common concepts, including first-person perspectives in RPGs, texture mapping, and dynamic music and lighting depending on what the situation the player was in. To say that this was anything other than a landmark title would be incorrect. The last games that Warren Spector produced for Origin were Ultima 7 Part 2, The Serpent Isle, and Ultima Underworld 2, Labyrinth of Worlds, before calamity struck. EA.
Sports. It's in the game.
EA bought out Origin Systems in 1992. The aftermath of this buyout saw a drastic quality decline in the Ultima series, as 8 and 9 both failed to deliver due to rushed development time, along with numerous gameplay and performance issues. Warren Spector continued to work under the new EA moniker, as he would produce the next big step in the immersive sim genre. System Shock was released in 1994 to massive critical praise. This game improved upon the emergent gameplay and player agency aspect of Ultima Underworld and brought them into a science fiction setting. While the game didn't excel super well in the sales department, the intelligent and immersive design struck a chord with developers and gamers alike. With this continued success, Warren Spector's next title was poised to hit it out of the park. Now this is the point if you were watching one of those old VH1 documentaries, the narrator would say, "But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing." Spector began working on another landmark immersive sim title, Thief: The Dark Project. However, due to financial struggles of the studio he was in charge of, Looking Glass Studios, he decided to leave before the game could actually ship. Warren Spector had an idea for his next project all the way back when he was wrapping up Ultima Underworld 2. He wanted to take the first-person Ultima Underworld style gameplay, but add in influences with the X-Files to create a more realistic cyberpunk-style setting. This harkened back to Spector's Dungeons & Dragons days, as he participated in a science fiction-style campaign where the Dungeon Master adapted the campaign based off what the player's choices were. Spector initially pitched the idea to Origin, but due to lack of interest from the team and technology limitations, the project was never greenlit. Spector again attempted to pitch this project to Looking Glass during the development of Thief, but those same logistical issues presented themselves yet again. EA eventually approached Spector with a deal, but he received an even better offer from a new company called Iron Storm, headed by a man named John Romero. Yeah, the guy that will make you his bitch and all that. It's easy to look back on that whole fiasco now and laugh at it, but back in the mid-90s, John Romero was on fire. Commander Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom 1 and 2, Quake. The guy just did not miss at his time at id Software. John Carmack and Romero kept butting heads over the development of Quake, which ultimately led to Romero's departure. Shortly after, he co-founded Ion Storm and approached Warren Spector with the offer of him being able to see his vision through with no creative restrictions. Spector accepted the offer, and Deus Ex production officially began. During the early production of Deus Ex, the team had many disagreements with one another. Initially, Warren Spector had two experienced designers that were shooting for the head designer role: Harvey Smith, who worked on System Shock and Ultima 8 Pagan, and Robert White from Ultima Online and Ultima 9 Ascension. This caused numerous arguments between the two, but seeing as how they both worked on two of the shittiest Ultima games, Smith was placed in charge, given that at least System Shock was good. The development team were also met with significant creative differences, with some developers wanting to do a little bit of everything and others wanting to excel in a few areas. The scope of Deus Ex was incredibly ambitious, as Spector wanted to have the title be genre busting in a sense. The game set out to include everything from immersive sims to first-person shooters to action RPGs to adventure games under its umbrella. Setting-wise, Spector took massive influence from the X-Files, James Bond, Men in Black, as well as dozens of real-world conspiracies, such as the JFK assassination, Area 51, and the Majestic 12. Most interestingly, the team also looked towards real-world events in the late 90s, such as terrorism and mechanically augmented soldiers, to make the setting even more grounded and relatable. Finally, the game had a few basic principles that were spearheaded as design philosophies by Spector. Problems, not puzzles. No forced failure. Players do, NPCs watch. And areas with multiple entrances and exits. All permeated during the production and can easily be traced back to Spector's roots in tabletop gaming. Suffice to say, plenty of problems began to emerge as well. A few examples were within the level design. Initially, the levels were far too big and it led to numerous performance issues. Coupled with that, the team shot for a more realistic design philosophy when crafting the environments that ultimately contributed very little to player enjoyment. This eventually led to many of the game's levels either being redesigned, sectioned off into smaller pieces, or completely cut. The most notable of these exclusions being a level based off of the White House, which honestly is a pretty big bummer because I think that would have been a really cool setting. During a demoing of the missions, however, industry icon Gabe Newell gave some very rough feedback to Spector, believing that his mission design was just not up to par. The most notable issue came in regards to enemy AI. I'll go into a little bit more detail on this as how it works in my gameplay breakdown, but this was a constant hurdle for Ion Storm to tackle. There were points where they showcased the game where they forgot to implement the AI, there were points where they had to scrap all of their initial work into AI before starting anew, and even then they just ended up settling by building upon the shooter-based AI that was already in the Unreal Engine rather than customizing it in their own way. This trouble with the AI continued very late into the game's development, and a similar story can actually be said of many of the in-game systems. In fact, outside of the dialogue and inventory systems, pretty much every gameplay element had to have some level of significant rework in some way. External factors also began to rear their heads at the Deus Ex team. The other half of Ion Storm, headed by John Romero, released Daikatana, a game often regarded as one of the greatest letdowns in the video gaming industry. A very below average game that saw numerous delays and a hyper-aggressive dick-swinging advertisement campaign really left a bad taste in audience and critics' mouths, and a lot of the bad press got pushed onto the Deus Ex team. This caused significant morale loss, as so many partners refused to do business with Ion Storm due to the failure of Daikatana. So we have an overly ambitious game with a confused and conflicting team structure that had significant technical issues with artificial intelligence, poor mission and level design that was also surrounded by a whirlwind of negative press for something they had little to no involvement in. Sounds like an absolute clusterfuck, right? Well, I've made a few of these videos now, and I know that trouble development is just part of the process. Deus Ex was released in June of 2000 exclusively to PC, and just... wow, what a fucking game. Deus Ex garnered reviews ranging from the respectable mid-80s to perfect 100s. A review from Eurogamer reads, "Moody and atmospheric, compelling and addictive, this is first-person gaming in grown-up form, and it is truly magnificent." The game received a few Game of the Year nods, but saw the majority of its praise retroactively. Publications such as IGN, PC Gamer, Time, G4 TV, and Edge placed the game within their upper echelon of top 100 games of all time lists. Sales-wise, the game did leave a lot to be desired. Within the first year, the game sold a little over 138,000 copies in the United States. Europe treated the game a little bit better, as it was able to hang with the sales of other landmark titles such as Diablo 2 and The Sims. And by 2009, the game finally achieved over 1 million units sold. The game's launch was also a bit of a mixed bag. Many players and critics were adoring the game, while others took issues with the slowdown created by the Direct 3D issues, thanks in large part to the limitations of the Unreal Engine at the time, as well as the large file size required for save data. In 2001, the Game of the Year edition was released, featuring some minor updates and a dev kit to allow for mod support. 2002 even saw a port to the PS2 of all things. I'm not covering it in this video, but this is one of the chopped up ports that I mentioned earlier. A lot of the levels saw minor reworks due to loading issues. There was an option for auto aim since it was a console shooter, and animations were now mocapped, and there were some pre-rendered cutscenes too. Dear God, we have finally made it. I can finally start talking about the game. I think all that context is important just to really know what the hell Deus Ex even is. This is a passion project led by one man's affinity for player's choice above all else. So from one long-winded expedition to another, let's get into Deus Ex's plot. Obviously, since this is a very story-rich game, the spoilers are at Omega Defcon level 5, so if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip to this time in the video. Deus Ex dares to ask a simple question. What if your uncle who rants all the time on Facebook and smokes way too much weed was right about all the conspiracy theories he believes in?
There is no gas shortage, man. It's all fake. The oil companies control everything. Like there's this guy who invented this car that runs on water, man.
Area 51, the Illuminati, Majestic 12, Knights Templar, Men in Black, vaccinations being used to control people are all real in this universe. On the flip side, I want you to really listen to some of the things I'm covering here and think about how this game was released in the year 2000 and the kind of stuff it talked about over 20 years ago. The year is 2052, and the world has been slowly spiraling downward for the past several decades. A lethal pandemic called the Grey Death has ravaged the world's population, and with the United States being among the hardest hit and with no cure in sight. A synthetic vaccine called Ambrosia is being manufactured by a megacorporation called VersaLife. This vaccine nullifies the effects of the Grey Death, but is in critically short supply. Because of how scarce a vaccine is, Ambrosia is only available to politicians, scientists, military personnel, and to the wealthy. This is one of the many factors that leads to a divide between the upper and lower classes. During this time, many riots begin to occur, drug usage becomes rampant, and terrorist organizations begin to develop in order to assist the common folk. Two of these terrorist organizations are the National Secessionist Forces, or NSF, based out of the United States, and Silhouette from France. To oppose the terrorist threats, the United Nations founded the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Coalition, or UNATCO for short. Stationed in a bunker beneath Liberty Island after a terrorist attack decapitated the monument, UNATCO looks to reclaim any stolen ambrosia from the NSF. This is where the game officially begins as we take control of JC Denton, a new agent for UNATCO who has been nanotechnologically enhanced. JC is a bit of a loner, very intelligent and perceptive for sure, but also cold and calculated. Yet he also has a sense of justice and duty as he ultimately believes he is doing the right thing. Those are some of the more universal traits of JC. However, a big part of Deus Ex is actually the ability to pick your own dialogue options. It's far from the most in-depth dialogue system I've ever seen, however, it really does allow for JC to be an extension of a player while also being his own character. That being said, his character design absolutely screams late 90s, and I love it. The slicked back hair, the trench coat, the sunglasses that he never takes off. God, I love it. Now, I really want to focus on the first main mission of Deus Ex because it does an absolutely fantastic job of setting up what to expect for the rest of the game. The first mission is to take down a makeshift NSF command center located inside the Statue of Liberty. The beginning of the mission sees us rendezvous with JC's brother Paul. Paul is very similar to JC in a lot of ways. He also works for UNATCO and was actually the first nano-augmented agent. Paul also has just as many things that sets him apart, though, too. Most notably, Paul is compassionate and encouraged JC to take measures to avoid conflict and murder if at all possible. Now, you remember how much I was emphasizing player choice throughout the beginning of this video? Well, it doesn't take too long for us to get our first real glimpse of it. Paul heavily encourages us to take non-lethal options. However, other NPCs on the island recommend killing as many terrorists as possible. This is a choice that will ultimately determine how other NPCs will respond to you in dialogue options later in the mission. It affects little else outside of NPC comments. However, the extra touch of world building really helps immerse the player into the game, making the world feel more alive. Speaking of immersion, let's take a minute to talk about the environmental storytelling in Deus Ex and why I believe it's one of the best in the medium. Throughout every level, there are computer terminals that have hosts of emails to read through, newspapers with interesting articles, books detailing fictional works, and data cubes featuring useful information. Now, the interesting thing here is that most games that have these sorts of data log types of world building usually only use it to answer puzzles or maybe flesh out the world a little bit. Deus Ex does both of those things and then some. Emails are essential to character development. You won't necessarily be lost if you don't read them. However, they can provide additional direction to the player as well as significant character and plot motivations and details earlier on. Newspapers have an interesting duality in the sense that they provide real-world events in the game as well as misinformation about said events too. Data cubes typically offer email login info, door passwords, and information around the world under the disguise of NPCs' digital journals to inject some personality into that info. Finally, books often draw massive parallels to some of the themes and events going on in the game. In most games that have these sorts of extra story content, I would really only recommend digging into them if you're a lore buff. Here though, I feel like it's a must to really get the full understanding of what the world of Deus Ex is all about. Every level has all of these scattered throughout the environment, and they give the player plenty of opportunities to draw their own conclusions based on what content they choose to listen to and ignore. Back to the story, we end up rescuing another UNATCO agent, Gunther Herman. Gunther represents the old guard of mechanically augmented agents, as evident by the clearly visible chrome all over his body. He harbors a sort of resentment towards the newer nano-augmented agents, as he is self-conscious in the fact that he cannot keep up given the limitations of the technology he has adopted. Eventually, JC clears out the NSF threat and begins to interrogate their leader, except the terrorist doesn't seem too interested in causing panic, and actually makes some interesting counterpoints to JC when discussing consolidation and the Trilateral Commission. We report back to our headquarters, take a brief visit to the women's restroom to harass our co-workers, and meet with our boss, Joseph Manderley. Manderley is our commanding officer at UNATCO, and he gives us details on our next mission and tells us to connect with some of the other characters.
By the way, Denton, stay out of the ladies' restroom. That kind of activity embarrasses the agency more than it does you.
Oh, come on, who the fuck snitched? Was it you, Janice? Anyways, we take this opportunity to meet a few of the other characters. First, we have our partner for the next couple of assignments, Anna Navarre. Much like Gunther, she is also mechanically augmented, but has a bit more of a tolerance for the nano-augmented agents, and a bit less of a desire to see NFS members make it out of those missions alive. Next, we have Sam Carter, who... They say the No, not that Sam Carter, this guy. He's the quartermaster of UNATCO, and someone that JC has a strong respect for. Then we have Jamie Reyes, a physician at UNATCO who specializes in the mechanically and nanotechnologically augmented agents. Finally, we have Alex Jacobson, a self-taught hacker who helps JC through the journey by sending him schematics, maps, and communications via Infolink. The next couple of missions sees JC travel through notable areas in New York such as Battery Park and Hell's Kitchen.
Now, not fucking look at me in the eyes! Not as pissed as I am! You fucking are! Donkey!
No, not that Hell's Kitchen. Along the way, we free some hostages, recover some stolen ambrosia, go to the bar, play some pool, get drunk with this random helicopter pilot, put our foot in our mouth when discussing political philosophy with the press, and murder a pimp in the back alley in cold blood after he refuses to give us the prostitute we paid for. You know, typical cop stuff. Actually, it's kind of funny. That random helicopter pilot is actually the guy who ends up flying us around the majority of the game. His name is Jock, and this is the only time you see him in person. Sometimes I like to pretend that Jock is a talking helicopter. Back at HQ, we cross paths with Walter Simmons. This guy is the head of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, otherwise known as FEMA. Strangely enough, Simmons struts around the place having clearance for far more than any other outsider, even going down to interrogate and kill some of the prisoners. We speak with Manderley to find out that Paul has been fired from UNATCO after failing to return from his last mission. JC sets out to a local airfield to stop a large amount of ambrosia from being shipped off and to assassinate the man behind this operation, Juan Lebedev. Along the way, he goes through the Mole People's tunnels. No, not literal mole people. Just a subterranean group of homeless people just living their lives in a shitty situation. No whimsy to be found here. JC makes his way to the airfield and we meet up with Paul again. Paul reveals that he's been working with the NSF the entire time and encourages JC to go inside and speak with Lebedev. Lebedev tells JC that he was actually created by a secret power-hungry organization and that the same corporation that makes the vaccine also created the plague. It's at this point that Navarre rushes into the room and requests that you kill Lebedev. Now, you as a player have a choice to make. Do you believe in what Paul and Lebedev were saying regardless of how crazy it sounds? Or do you trust in UNATCO and Navarre, who haven't steered you wrong at all at this point? Or do you just walk away and let the events unfold how they would regardless of your input? Deus Ex does this multiple times throughout the story and each one is absolutely brilliant. And there doesn't always seem to be a best or obvious answer. Not only will this change later dialogue options throughout the rest of the story, certain bosses and characters may or may not show up or be dispatched differently based on what you choose to do here. I ultimately chose to kill Navarre by placing a lamb right before she walked in the door because, you know, canon choice. Which led to Lebedev confirming that a secret organization called Majestic 12 was actually controlling UNATCO. Upon returning to UNATCO HQ, we report our activity back to Manderley, who then assigns us to travel to Hong Kong in order to assassinate Tracer Tong, a rebel scientist who has made connections with Paul. Now I have a very important question. Do you sex? Because these two sure do. Paul assigns JC to send a radio message to some NSF allies to request for aid. Upon doing this, JC is immediately labeled as a traitor and must fight his way back out of the NSF headquarters as it has been overrun by UNATCO troops. JC rushes back to Paul's apartment where Paul urges him to leave through the window as UNATCO agents and men in black from the Majestic 12 have started swarming the hotel. This acts as another player choice. If JC leaves through the window, Paul will be killed off screen. However, if JC stays and attempts to fight off the forces, Paul will live. Now, interestingly enough, some more possibilities also exist in this event. See, if JC dies in the fight within Paul's apartment, he'll be taken to the next mission. However, if he is able to fend off the troops, he can continue on as if he left out the window, and Navarra, if she's still alive, and Gunther will apprehend JC in the subway station. I, of course, shoot for the most canon story of having JC accidentally blow himself up with a lamb inside of the apartment building. Canon choice. We wake up inside of a cell with all of our equipment confiscated. Thankfully, a mysterious hacker by the name of Daedalus opens the cell door for us and provides us with a map to reclaim our stuff. We make our way through the lab, killing one of the men in black, and this, well, I have no fucking clue what this thing is. A green chicken? Poltra? Oh, it's a greasel. Huh, okay. What the fuck is a greasel? Oh, huh. Sure. Well, since we killed the Men in Black agent earlier, we have all but confirmed that we are currently in a Majestic 12 facility. We also end up finding Paul to see that he's alive and well. Or dead if you leapt out the window. Don't pick that route, Paul is too good for that. There's a lot of information that is learned during this section of the game, including the fact that MJ-12 were originally controlled by the Illuminati, but have since been removed from their influence by Bob Page when he performed a coup of the Circle of Five, who were essentially the heads of the Illuminati. On a more personal level, we also find that the nano-augmented agents such as JC and Paul come equipped with a kill switch that, when activated, causes them to self-destruct. UNATCO, being the ones in control of the engagement of the kill switch, proves to be a little bit of a problem. Thankfully, we find out that Tracer Tong actually has a way of helping us remove the kill switch, so we have our next destination planned. After meeting back up with Paul, Daedalus gives us the codes to leave this place, so we make our way to the exit, fight whatever the fuck these things are, and exit out into the bottom of UNATCO headquarters. Huh. Looks like Paul was right all along. See, I told you he didn't deserve to die. We get a chance to say goodbye to some of the other NPCs. We can convince Reyes to meet up with us in Hong Kong, or he can be found in the Paris level later on if we tell him to stay. We also get to meet up with Manderley, who's in the middle of getting his ass chewed out by Simmons. We find out during this interaction that our kill switch has already been activated and we have 23 hours left to live. So we do the only logical thing by killing our former boss. Canon choice. And finally meet up with Alex. JC accuses Alex of being Daedalus, which Alex actually denies. But Alex gives us the keys to escape and we make our way to the helicopter. That is, unless we somehow did not kill Navarra yet. This time there is no option. She must die here. We murder our former coworker and get on the helicopter to depart for Hong Kong. Would you believe me if I told you we're not even halfway through this game yet? Yeah, this story is fucking nuts. Anyways, we make it to Hong Kong and just, wow, this is easily the best section of the game for me. The hub world is so dense and there's so many things to do and interact with that it's almost overwhelming. Before we can meet with Tracer Tong, the first main objective we need to complete is to settle the dispute between two triad groups, Red Arrow and Luminous Path. See, there was a sword called the Dragon's Tooth that was taken by the former leader of Red Arrow from the VersaLife Hong Kong laboratories. Maggie Chow notifies Red Arrow that Luminous Path has killed their leader and taken the sword for themselves. We meet with Gordon Quick, the leader of Luminous Path, who is very suspicious of Chow and asks us to investigate. We meet with Maggie Chow in her apartment, who claims that there exists some evidence to prove her innocence in the police station. Too bad I didn't get to go check that out, as I went upstairs to her bedroom, stole all of her shit, and stepped on her cat, so she got pissed and attacked me. What? I'm the good guy, come on. Look at my initials. Thankfully, I found a secret entrance to a Majestic 12 facility inside of Maggie Chow's penthouse. You wouldn't believe how I figured this out too. As I was walking around, I noticed certain parts of the floor had a metallic noise as opposed to the wood floors that I was walking on. And I found a lantern in that area that actually opened a secret door. Yeah, I felt like I was the smartest man on the planet when all of this was going on. Anyways, inside this MJ-12 base, we actually see the Dragon's Tooth. We break it out of its chamber it was held in, and congratulations, you just unlocked easy mode for the game. No, seriously, this thing can 1 to 3 hit kill anything that isn't a machine, even without any points put into the low-tech skill. This became my primary weapon for the rest of the game. Seriously, I love this thing so much. We return to Gordon Quick, who directs us to a nearby bar to find the leader of the Red Arrow, Max Chen. When we go to the bar, we party the only way JC knows how, by sneaking some girls inside, dancing very awkwardly with 4 identical women, opening fire, causing everyone to panic, going upstairs and talking more political philosophy with the bartender, finding some Russian soldiers who spill my drink.
I spill my drink.
And breaking into a two-way mirror into a secret meeting room. Again, I had no idea this was a thing and I was so shocked when this happened. We eventually find Max Chen, convince him of Chow's deceit, and gain access to the Luminous Path compound. We finally meet with Tracer Tong, who deactivates our kill switch and then gives us the mission to obtain the ROM encoding for the Dragon's Tooth in order to produce copies for both the triads. We head to the VersaLife facility and make our way back down to the labs. We get in, get the ROM, sound an alarm, and get the fuck out. Tong sends us back to VersaLife to find the structure for the Grey Death, where we also get contacted by Daedalus to destroy the Universal Constructor, a device used to make the augmentation upgrade canisters, as well as the virus for the Grey Death and the temporary vaccine Ambrosia. Also, did I mention that VersaLife made the Grey Death virus and that Ambrosia only works for 2 days before you need more? Oh, I didn't? Well, fuck this company. Down at the bottom, Maggie Chow can be encountered, but I already left a bullet hole in her the size of a football. Canon choice. We leave VersaLife and get contacted by Tong that a super freighter has left of the virus that used to be owned by Illuminati member Stanton Dowd. We meet back up with our talking helicopter and return to New York. Upon returning to New York, we find out that Manhattan is currently under martial law and is placed under the authority of FEMA. Even worse, JC is a wanted man for the murders of Lebedev, Manderley, and Navarre. We meet up with former Illuminati member Stanton Dowd, who helps us locate his freighter so we can blow it up to destroy the Grey Death inside. Along the way, Daedalus contacts JC to notify him that after this is done, Dowd will lead us to another Illuminati member, Morgan Everett, and he can be found by meeting with a lady named Nicolette Duclair. We meet back up with Dowd in a graveyard, sure. Then he gives us information to find Duclair, and we have another shootout with MJ-12 members before heading to Paris. During our expedition through Paris, we get contacted by someone named Icarus, who has some disturbing things to say. We make our way through the catacombs of Paris, another really fucking cool area, and then head to a nightclub to find Duclair. We pick Duclair up and head to Chateau Duclair. After solving a few puzzles on how to get to the basement, we use Duclair's mother's computer to contact Devon, who instructs us to go to the Knights Templar Cathedral so we can complete the vaccine for the Grey Death. We go to the temple, have a showdown with Gunther, and are able to meet Everett by having one of his goons knock us out and bring us to his home. A lot of information is revealed at Everett's home. First, we learn that Bob Page killed the other members of the Illuminati and invented the Grey Death and his cure in order to achieve world domination. He also placed Simmons as director of FEMA in order to help him achieve his goals. Yet there still seems to be bigger plans to still be found out. Also, Daedalus is a rogue AI that has been aiding us, while Icarus is under the command of Bob Page. Finally, Everett also tells us we need to find the X-51 resistance group at the Vandenberg Air Force Base, as they are close to completing another universal constructor which we can use to mass produce the cure. He also instructs us to upload Daedalus to the military computer so that he may fight off Icarus. We also find a ton of optional interesting things. The first is a helicopter mechanic who is actually working for MJ-12 that we can dispatch of. When we do this will allow Jock to live in a later part of the game. Oh, and it also gave us this gem.
Oh my god, JC, a bomb!
A bomb.
Next is Morpheus, a prototype AI that was essentially testing the waters for Daedalus and Icarus. He was essentially built for data mining and pattern matching, as he was able to give tons of info about JC that he never even revealed to the AI. And wait a minute, how old is this game again? Yeah. Scary shit, right? We also have an encounter with Lucius de Beers, the former leader of the Illuminati, whose body is cryogenically frozen, but his consciousness remains. Everett was keeping him frozen to steal his knowledge under the promise he would return his body one day, even though he never intended on holding up his end of the bargain. Again, all of this is completely optional and missable. Yeah, the side content's crazy too. We arrive at Vandenberg and find the head scientist Gary Savage, the less famous sibling to his brother 21. We remove the Majestic 12 troops occupying the base to be told by Savage that we need to get the schematics from his daughter Tiffany that she stole from an MJ-12 submarine base, and we need to upload Daedalus to the military network. One problem though. Okay, maybe two. First, when Daedalus gets uploaded to the computer, he becomes fused with Icarus, creating the new AI Helios. This is apparently a trap set by Bob Page. The other problem is that Page also kidnapped Tiffany, who still has a hold of all of the schematics. We head to a nearby gas station where Tiffany is being held for a mandatory stealth section. We then rescue her to find out that she was unsuccessful in retrieving the schematics. JC heads to the subbase and finds and sends the schematics back to Savage. On the way back, Page notifies JC that Helios intercepted that signal, and Vandenberg is now being targeted by a nuclear missile strike. On the way back to the helicopter, Simmons confronts JC, who we can choose to kill him now or in the final area. We get back to Savage, take a helicopter to the missile silo, have a boss battle with Howard Strong. Alright then, and we make our way to the final level, Area 51. Upon arriving at Area 51, Jock may or may not die in a helicopter crash, depending on if the sketchy mechanic was dispatched of earlier. Simmons also may or may not show up, depending on whether we dispatched of him in the last level. As we make our way through the base, we run into these little gray aliens. Sure, why not? JC confronts Bob Page in the heart of Area 51 for a final showdown as he gets prepared to merge with Helios to rule the world. And then we get presented with 3 possible endings for the game. If we decide to side with Morgan Everett, we could choose to kill Bob Page, preserve Area 51, and join the Illuminati. If we decide to go with Tracer Tong, we destroy Area 51 and the system used for global communication, ushering a new dark age free from Illuminati and Majestic 12 control. Finally, we get contacted by Helios so that we may fuse our consciousness together in order to govern the world together as a new consciousness. The 3 options presented essentially ask the question of who should be responsible for humanity: a group of humans controlling from the shadows, a benevolent AI, or should humanity start over anew? Each one seems to have its pros and cons, but with no clear-cut answer as to which one is the best. The player makes their choice, and then, well, I'm not entirely sure. Whichever ending the player chooses will show a brief snippet of the events afterwards, and the credits begin to roll. The ending is left purposely ambiguous in order to have players ask themselves whether the choice they made was right, as well as consider what the impact of their decision was. And normally, I kind of hate this sort of ambiguity, but with Deus Ex it's a little different. This game from the very first mission presents players with ethical dilemmas and questions that really don't have an obvious or even correct answer, and then it asks them to think about it from another angle and make a choice. If I could say one thing, it's that Deus Ex has balls. You know how there is a subsection of gamers who don't want anything related to politics anywhere near video games? Deus Ex's entire narrative is centered around politics in the story and how it relates to our real world situations. JC routinely gets into debates with various characters talking about touchy subjects such as corporate control, dependence on technology, terrorism, devotion to one's country, consolidation, misinformation, and many other subjects that don't really have an easy solution. To end the game, JC gets asked the ultimate question: what should we do about all of the issues that the player has been presented within this world? By not showing the complete outcome, the game doesn't back itself into a corner of making a statement on what would be the best possible ending. Because of this, the game stays true to its themes of the future being uncertain and that no one has all the answers. Deus Ex themes bleed into every aspect of the game, from the plot to the characters' dialogues to the books you find slain on the ground. Everything serves a greater purpose. Coupled with the usage of real-world historical events and topics, we have a game that becomes increasingly believable and relatable. The characters are all well written, and each represents different ideologies that, again, aren't 100% right or wrong. The multiple factions add a layer of depth that keeps expanding as the game continues in order for the player to see how large the scope of the problems asked by the game games actually are. The game's scope as a globe-trotting adventure was remarkable and really helped flesh out the world into a believable place. Hell's Kitchen, Hong Kong, the Catacombs of Paris, Battery Park, Area 51. These are all locations that will stand out in my mind for years to come for their remarkable set pieces, side quests, emergent gameplay, and opportunities for choice. I love how many options players have in regards to the ways they approach the story of Deus Ex. This is the type of story that offers so many outcomes and possibilities that even when the choices you make still lead you into the same alternate outcomes, the details are interesting enough, warranting multiple playthroughs in order to experience them all. This is it. This is one of, if not the best story that I have ever experienced in a video game. Hell, I'd honestly say it stands among the best fictional stories ever written. It's right up there with the Blade Runner series to me in terms of sci-fi importance. The story of Deus Ex was absolutely marvelous, and it's something that I believe that everyone that is interested in gaming should experience, especially with the modern context that we have now as we approach the time that Deus Ex was actually set in. It's starting to get a little scary. Well, I had heaps of praise to say about the story, but when it comes to the game's presentation, it's most certainly not the game's strong point. It's not bad per se, just a little all over the place. Let's talk graphics first, and it's an FPS PC game from 2000. Do you honestly think it looks good? The answer to that question is a definitive no, but honestly I don't think that the game looks that spectacular even when compared to other games at the time. Looking at games that released around the same time frame such as Max Payne, Shenmue, and Final Fantasy IX, the difference is plainly obvious. The character models are these weird polygonal mannequin looking things that for the most part don't really share any difference in dimensions, and the changes are purely texture based. Character animations are also super rigid, and during cutscenes, most movement we see are purely mouth flaps and hand movements. Environmental design doesn't really see a whole lot of improvements either. This game is dark, and I mean just straight up impossible to see things some of the time. Now I know there are gameplay implications that this provides, but in the beginning it was incredibly difficult to adjust to. There really doesn't exist anything outside of the explorable levels to separate it from the skybox either. This makes the levels clash somewhat with how the skyboxes look. Actually, come to think of it, a lot of these levels are super empty in regards to detail. You get the occasional sign and of course the lore bits in books and newspapers, but other than that, there isn't a whole lot to make these environments feel alive. Deus Ex is still propelled by a relatively strong art style. The cyberpunk-inspired outfits of all the NATCO agents just screams late 90s sci-fi, and several locations such as the MJ-12 base underneath VersaLife, the submarine base, and the nightclubs provide visually striking locations. In regards to audio, well, let's start with the voice acting, and good God, does this reek of late 90s voice acting. JC gives the most deadpan deliveries I've ever heard from a video game protagonist.
I gave you the money. Now give me the girl.
And when he does add some emotion, it's,
Sure.
creepy. The rest of the main cast isn't that bad, serviceable at best, forgettable at worst. Where the game's voice acting really gets great is when it comes to the different non-named NPCs. Good God, they really did not give a fuck in the most hilarious way. These NPCs talk like someone doing a racist impression at a bad comedy club, and it can lead to such barn-burning lines such as this.
Our country 'tis the sweet land of liberty, of the I sing.
Am I telling you what you want to know? Can I have another 20 credits?
Don't talk, or we'll feed you the Garkians.
It's kind of funny for being horribly stereotyped, and it kind of makes me wonder why this game didn't get its voice acting memed on as hard as games like Resident Evil or Mega Man 8. Music is honestly something that really took me by surprise. This game's soundtrack actually kind of fucks. It has great tracks for ambiance, stealth, action, and for some areas such as Hong Kong, Paris, and the nightclubs, we get some certified bangers. When it comes to performance, we have a few things to talk about. First, before I go any further, I understand that this game is best experienced nowadays with fan-made launchers that can help with many of the issues I'm about to list. However, I wanted to look at this game through a vanilla experience, so I decided to opt out of those launchers for this playthrough. So the most persistent issue that I noticed when it came to exiting and relaunching the game, and what that did to my resolution settings. Every time that I launched the game, my resolution was always set to full screen, and also the lowest resolution. A very easy fix, but one that grew annoying after a while. Something else to be noted was that I crashed about 3 or 4 times during my playthrough. These typically came when I was trying to do some stupid shit like stack 5 lambs and use a ItsGheb gun to explode them, but it's also something worth mentioning. Overall, the performance was a bit of a mixed bag. Nothing really deal-breaking, and there are some aspects that stand out as being exceptional, leading to a net positive for Deus Ex. If there's one other area that Deus Ex excels in other than story, it is the gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, Deus Ex combines many different genres to fit under the umbrella of immersive sim. Interestingly enough, the game isn't the best in any single category when compared to other titans of the genre. Deus Ex isn't a better first-person shooter than Half-Life, it's not a better RPG than Baldur's Gate 2, and it doesn't do stealth as well as Metal Gear Solid, no matter how many cigarettes you have JC smoke. No, instead, Deus Ex provides just enough tools of each of these aspects in order for the game to still be fun, but not have one area outshine the others. JC has the odds truly stacked against him. Most missions are crawling with enemies, and JC's destination isn't always clear. There are no mini-maps, no quest markers, just the clues given from the Objectives tab on the menu and NPC dialogue. Levels are incredibly expansive and non-linear, and the tools that JC has to overcome the opposition with, he needs to procure on site. So the cool thing about Deus Ex is that the game will present players with a problem, and then may occasionally offer 1 or 2 solutions to solve the issue. However, there are far more than those 2 choices. Depending on how you built your character or what you have found, the choices could be close to a dozen during any given circumstance. So let's take a few minutes to talk about just what the hell JC can do. First, let's get one of the more amusing options out of the way. JC is able to interact with the environment by picking up and throwing objects. Now, to people familiar with Elder Scrolls games, this may not seem like a big deal, but the type of out-of-the-box thinking that can go into using this approach is so gratifying. One example from my playthrough had me fall into a dark alleyway in which I could not find the exit. Thankfully, I noticed there was a fence lower than the rest of the others and a ton of trash cans nearby, so I made a little tower of trash cans in order to plan my escape. Honestly, one of the highlights of the game for me. It was both funny and made me feel like I came up with a really great solution. These objects, of course, can be used for other things, such as distracting guards for stealth, or even having them open entrances they were concealing. The second option is augmentations that JC can acquire. These operate on a sort of battery that must have some juice in order to abuse these perks. JC comes pre-equipped with the light augment, and good god, get used to using that a lot, because this game is so fucking dark. There are many sections of the game completely devoid of light, where you can't even see an inch past JC's mechanically augmented dick. Let me tell you, you always want to make sure you have at least 20% of your batteries left, because if you get stuck in the dark, you just made your whole situation a lot worse. If only JC would stop acting cool for 5 seconds and take off his stupid fucking sunglasses, you might be able to see. Throughout the game, JC comes across these augmentation canisters that he can use to add more to his arsenal. Now, each augment specifically targets an area of JC's bodies and cannot be changed later, so I really hope you like what you pick. But these upgrades are nearly all awesome, letting JC perform superhuman feats like increasing his mobility, seeing through walls, and regenerating health. All godsends, and these can even be upgraded further to increase their effectiveness. The third option to discuss is the skills that JC can earn. Through exploration and story progression, JC can gain experience points which exclusively go towards skills. Now, about half of the skills increases proficiency with particular weapons, but the other half are a little bit more situational. Environmental training increases the effectiveness of some items, which is kind of pointless. Lockpicking and electronics increases JC's ability to use lockpicks and multi-tools for hacking. Medicine increases how effective healing items are. Computer will allow JC to hack PCs in order to avoid needing login info. Highly recommended at least taking 1 level in this. And then swimming. Don't do it. Okay, but seriously, maybe consider just 1 point for the added swim speed and oxygen, but it's so scarcely used, it's basically pointless. The fourth option are items that JC can come across. JC has a limited inventory, and when you already have to carry 4+ weapons, that inventory space becomes smaller and smaller with every new option presented. This means that JC has to pick and choose what he wants to keep and set aside. Certain items like lockpicks, multi-tools, and medkits were always essential pickups, as they are almost always universally helpful. Consumables may be found, and they can range in usefulness from increasing JC's battery to taking a bunch of drugs to go into a ketamine-infused drug trip. Other equipment can be picked up, allowing JC to take less ballistic damage, survive in poisonous areas for longer, turn invisible, or even breathe underwater. Lastly, I do think it's hilarious just at the limited amount of food JC can actually eat. My man goes through the entire game eating nothing but soy food and candy bars and drinking soda, beer, liquor, and wine. Hopefully the nano augments can also help pump out JC's stomach and liver, because Jesus Christ. No pun intended. The fifth choice relies on the combat-related options presented to players. There are low-tech options that offer silent and some non-lethal approaches, pistols which are typically shorter range but still offer both lethal and non-lethal possibilities, rifles which trend towards medium and long range that are all entirely lethal, heavy weapons for when one really wants to blow some shit up, and demolition, offering both lethal and non-lethal grenade choices. Some weapons can even use different ammo types, such as the shotgun, either using buckshot for humans or sabot for machines. Weapon modifications can also be used to augment the magazine size, accuracy, reload speed, effective range, and recoil on a gun. Some weapons can even get attachments such as lasers, scopes, and silencers. The gunplay is a little bit janky to say the least. Hip firing is just straight unreliable until further upgrading, and reloading takes an eternity for most guns. Fully upgrading the gun really makes it a weapon of mass destruction, however. I upgraded my sniper to the point where it was more accurate to hip fire than use the scope, and it became my primary form of offense in the second half of the game. The sixth main choice to go over in this game is its use of stealth. JC is able to manipulate enemies by creating noise and distractions for pretty much all the prior listed options in order to slip by undetected. But JC has options such as tranquilizer darts and riot pods in order to take down enemies non-lethally and quietly. Now, the stealth mechanics aren't the greatest, and the cone of vision and hearing on PCs are questionable at best. Actually, the AI in general is a bit more artificial and a little bit less intelligent, if you know what I'm saying. The AI has absolutely no problem funneling into rooms, stepping over the bodies of their comrades I just killed, and then completely forgetting where I am seconds after I leave the area. But the second I shoot them, they know exactly where I'm at, no matter where I'm at in the level, making getting swarmed mildly annoying. Lastly, JC can always explore the environment. Deus Ex levels are dense, non-linear, and have a ton of different secrets to find. He can find keys and login info to open doors and email files he didn't have access to. He can find notes detailing how certain routes can take him places, or even gain codes by reading data cubes. He can either lockpick or hack his way into areas that were previously inaccessible if he needs to get a move on and doesn't feel like exploring. Or hell, just find alternative routes that were either already made or that you found on your own in order to reach the objective. Deus Ex's exploration often only rewards players with more consumable items, experience points, and occasional new routes. However, the joy gained from discovering these areas was the thing that ultimately kept me doing it again and again. Because of how expansive JC's options are, each problem the game presents you comes with a slew of possibilities that will give everyone a slightly different experience. Even something as simple as getting through a locked door, getting by a group of enemies, or infiltrating a boat can be met with a couple dozen different ways to accomplish the same result. Because of this, Deus Ex has a high replayability value. Not everything is necessarily perfect. Enemy variety is a little on the sparse side. Enemies either fall into human and animals or the machine category, with different strengths and weaknesses for each. For the most part, outside of the heavy machines, you essentially dispatch of enemies the same way every time. Boss battles are really only beefed up version of standard enemies and can still go down super easy if you know what you're doing. Also, this game existed in a time before autosave, so be ready to save scum often or have frequent resets, especially at the higher difficulty levels. Not that those difficulty levels provide much, only really causing JC to take more damage from enemy attacks. Oh, what else is there? Oh, multiplayer is a thing. It doesn't work without some fan patch content now, but hey, if you and some friends want to jump into a 23-year-old game and duke it out in some classic 2000 style deathmatch, then that's an option, I suppose. Overall, Deus Ex could almost feel intimidating sometimes, given the amount of options given to the player's disposal. I, for one, absolutely love the flexibility the game provides. Sometimes going straight forward was fun. Sometimes finding the secret route was the best thing to do. And other times, finding my own way was the smartest thing that I could have done in the situation. And I love that this game gives me the choice. While there were things here and there that were minor annoyances, that's all they ever really became, just minor annoyances. So what if it's hard to see? So what if I don't have a weapon to take down that mech? So what if I'm out of lockpicks to open up that door? Find another way, make it your own. This was truly a remarkable gameplay experience, and one I cannot wait to revisit. Deus Ex was truly an amazing experience. Initial clunkiness aside, when the game began to click with me, it latched onto me like few games ever do. I found the gameplay loop deep and replayable, and the story to be thought-provoking and unique. Even if the presentation doesn't hold up particularly well in some areas, this was a game that had me constantly thinking about it even when I wasn't playing. I don't know what else to say other than this is one of the best games I have ever played, and something I truly believe anyone who has an interest in gaming should give a shot. I think this game has
a little something for everyone.
And I don't just say that for the meme, but it's my honest to God opinion. Keep in mind, I played this game completely vanilla and I'm still giving it this verdict. I haven't even gotten to the mod scene yet. After Deus Ex Game of the Year Edition was released, fans finally had a way to modify the base experience. If going back to old video games is a sticking point for you, I would recommend checking out Deus Ex Revision and GMDX. These both act as updated overhauls for the base game, including support for newer versions of DirectX, improved AI, upgraded textures and physics, as well as new level design paths to keep returning players on their toes. Easily the most famous Deus Ex mod is the Nameless mod released back in 2009. This mod essentially acted as an inside joke for a Deus Ex fan forum from the early 2000s, and it has a more lighthearted and humorous tone than the base game does. The mod offers new music, gameplay options, and a meta style of progression, giving people different outcomes whenever they sequence break with previously known passwords. Thankfully, the mod scene has been keeping the IP alive in people's minds because the official releases have been all over the place. In late 2003, Deus Ex saw a sequel release entitled Deus Ex Invisible War, a game that I've heard was pretty decent for the most part, but failed to recapture the magic of the original. Invisible War went without series creator Warren Spector. It stripped back many of the player's options, and even if the presentation saw a noticeable improvement, ultimately did not capture the heart of fans like the original. And then the series kind of went dormant for a while. Ion Storm closed down in 2005, and Eidos Interactive inherited the rights to the Deus Ex IP. Spector would go on to work on Thief, Deadly Shadows, and crazy enough, the epic Mickey series of all things, but hasn't really worked on too many other projects outside of that. In 2011, we finally saw the return of Deus Ex with Deus Ex Human Revolution, a game that saw a very warm reception upon its release. Selling much better than any of its predecessors, Human Revolution was a prequel to the original Deus Ex and brought modern gameplay enhancement to the series, becoming a critical and fan favorite. Deus Ex was poised to make a grand return. In 2013, Deus Ex The Fall was released for iOS? 2016 was kind of the year of Deus Ex in a way, since we saw two releases, Deus Ex Go for mobile devices, and Mankind Divided for PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Go was met with decent praise as a mobile puzzler that ended up getting shut down in early 2023, and Mankind Divided was set to be the next major title in the franchise, and was also met with pretty solid commercial performance as well as critical and fan praise. Deus Ex seemed poised for a big return, especially for a VR project of Mankind Divided on the horizon. However, in 2017, it was reported the follow-up to Mankind Divided was cancelled and the franchise was being put on ice. 7 years later, and still no official word on what the state of the Deus Ex franchise is. We have heard some reports from people such as Jason Schreier of Bloomberg that states the next Deus Ex title is in the very early stages of development, meaning that we are more than likely not seeing anything from this franchise for the next several years. It's a very sad fact because these games have all been good, minus The Fall, and made a notable impact on the industry. Deus Ex long-lasting appeal and influence doesn't just reside in its own series, but in the games it's influenced. This is the game that really popularized the immersive sim genre that studios such as Arcane would go on to make their MO. We have games such as Deathloop, Prey, and the Dishonored series to pick up where Deus Ex left off. And while all of those titles are excellent, I really want to see this franchise return someday. With indie titles such as Cruelty Squad becoming successes, we know that there's a market for this genre, and I'd really like to see what else the series has to offer. Thank you everyone for watching. This was definitely a long one, so I appreciate you sticking to the end of the video. I just wanted to share the results of the poll that I put up a few weeks ago for my planned content for you guys. So the winner of that poll was Fallout 3 plus all the DLC, and oh boy, that is going to be another big project given the sheer size of Bethesda RPGs. Coming in second, we actually have a two-way tie between Batman Arkham Asylum and Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. So I'll be tackling those after the Fallout video. And last but not least, we actually have another tie between Horizon Zero Dawn and Call of Duty 4. So I will get to those eventually. It looks like I have my work cut out for me, so please stay tuned for more content from my channel. What was your favorite memory of Deus Ex? Please share with me in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure sure to give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing. And then I'll catch you guys in the next one.